Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the Blue Note Tone Poet calendar for 2024. Now, a lot of you are going to say, didn't that happen like over a week ago? And I know in the YouTube world, it's kind of like whoever gets there first kind of thing wins. Perhaps with some of these videos. I was on vacation. I was out of the country. In fact, the day that the calendar came out, that it was put out, released, I was getting on a plane. So didn't even have a chance. But I thought, I can't like continue making videos if I don't at least address this release schedule, because these are the videos that it feels to me like people look forward to the most, and I do enjoy making them. So what we're going to do is go down each of the titles. I can't promise that we're going to do it in any short period of time, but what I can say is that I'm going to separate this video up into chapters. And so if you go down into the description, I think most people know this, but in case you don't, you can go down into the description and actually click through the chapters. So if you get tired of me talking about one of the releases, you can skip ahead to the next, or if you only want to hear what I have to say about one or two releases, you can just skip ahead very easily, and you don't need to drag the slider right across the video to find what you're looking for. So let's talk high level first, okay? So if anybody was ever disappointed by any previous Tone Poet calendar release schedule, which I don't think anybody has been. I mean, I know that people are always saying, oh, why wasn't this chosen, or why wasn't that chosen? But if there's a headline for this Tone Poet release schedule, it's that it's Bobby Hutcherson, Hank Mobley, Donald Byrd, and Lee Morgan. And I don't think that anybody can complain about that, because I mean, these are the guys that everybody wants to hear across the Blue Note catalog, or at least, some of the list of folks that people really want to hear as much as they can. And there is a lot of each of these musicians, not necessarily as leaders in every case, although I think that each of them have at least one release, but they're also represented in the lineup of so many of these other sessions. So personally, I feel really good about this calendar. I'm excited. So just to kind of lay of the land here, right? So there's 24 titles. They're putting out 2 per month in 2024. And they mention in the press release that something else is going to be announced. And they're going to announce it early in 2024. So probably sometime in Q1, maybe like January, February. They're going to announce something else in addition to those 24 titles. The speculation that I've heard so far is that it's either going to be a box set, or it's going to be a single title in an expanded format. So think about the Ornette Coleman box set, right? Or think about John Coltrane, the expanded edition, where they had the complete master tapes, right? And they had the stereo and the mono. I have theories on what this release is going to be. And at the end, after I go through these, and you can skip ahead if you want, I'm going to give you my thoughts on what that might be. So otherwise, high level, like I said, 24 titles, 18 of them were put out on Blue Note originally, 3 were Blue Note sessions, right? Because some of these are shelved. 18 of them are on Blue Note, 3 are on Transition Records. This is the first time that Tone Poet is addressing that label. 1 is on United Artists, and 2 are on Pacific Records. Within that bucket of 18 Blue Note records, just 2 of them have been released in the 75th anniversary series. So if you think back to some of my prediction videos, right, where I was speculating on what might be released in the Blue Note calendar, one of the things that we've seen is that Tone Poet and Classic Series have been reissuing 75th anniversary series titles. Typically it's Classic Series that they end up in, but sometimes they end up in Blue Note. So in this case, 2 of the 18 Blue Note were actually previously put out in the Blue Note 75th anniversary series. So otherwise, looking at the list, I think that there's only 2 others that have had any kind of modern reissue. One was put out by Heavenly Sweetness, and one was put out on Elemental. And so aren't those both European labels too? So therefore none in the US. So otherwise, these are titles that have not been reissued in any quality format in recent decades. So I think that this is a great list. This is exactly what Blue Note should be focusing on, because we already have some of the other titles on, say, Music Matters or AP or some of these other reissue labels. Like, go for the ones that haven't had any attention, and that really seems to be what Blue Note has done this time. And then finally, 4 of the titles out of the 24 were originally shelved. And so, maybe they had like reissues or first editions in the 80s or so, but they haven't had like, say, a reissue of quality and not recently. And again, they were originally shelved. So that's kind of the lay of the land. I do have the ability to show you most of these. So actually only 6 of the 24 I don't own originals of. The others I do. Even if by originals what I mean is like the original LT series edition. So I'm going to be able to show you what they look like. I'm going to run down the list and give you a little bit of thoughts about these titles. And we're going to close with, again, my predictions for what that box set or expanded edition might be, as well as which of the titles that I'm most excited about. So that's where we're headed. Sorry for the long preamble. As usual, if you could go ahead and hit like, hit subscribe, helps me out quite a bit. Follow me on Instagram at what_can_brown, and we will get going. All right, so let's start off with the 2 releases on January 5th, 2024. So the first one is Lou Donaldson's Midnight Creeper. This is actually one of the first titles that we knew was coming in advance. I believe that Joe Harley signaled it or referenced it either in somebody else's video interview or something, or maybe it was on Instagram. But anyway, we knew this one was coming, and it's coming up first. So yeah, Lou Donaldson's Midnight Creeper. Who else is on this? We have Blue Mitchell, Lonnie Smith, George Benson, Idris Muhammad, and by the way, he's credited as Leo Morris in the liner notes here. So this was originally recorded in March of 1968. Despite the fact that it's a little bit later in Blue Note's catalog and definitely Liberty era, we do still have Rudy Van Gelder as the engineer, and that's a good thing. So the tone here is very much soul jazz forward, but not popular covers. You're not going to hear like the pop hits of the day. You're not going to have Beatles covers on this thing. This is more inspired soul jazz, in my opinion. Has a very sort of fast-paced, toe-tapping kind of vibe. I get why Tone Poet chose this for their series. They're punchy horn lines, right? There's shuffling and sort of swinging cymbal heavy drums. The organ here resonates really, really well. You just know that it's going to sound great. When you hear this music, you can like envision it immediately in the Tone Poet series, and you know it's going to sound great. And I think whether or not you're interested in this title is going to come down to whether you're interested in that sort of soul jazz forward sound. Next up, we have Elvin Jones with Polycurrents. So on this, we have Fred Tompkins, George Coleman, Joe Farrell, I think it might be Farrell, Pepper Adams, Wilbur Little, and Candido Camero. So this is originally recorded in September of 1969. Again, despite the fact that it's late, we do have Rudy Van Gelder back as the engineer. So on this album, it's kind of a spiritual jazz vibe here, especially with Joe Farrell's English horn in the first piece and his flute in the second. He kind of alternates between sort of some of the reeds or the woodwinds. So what you can expect here, when I say spiritual jazz, what I mean, and I know that's a problematic term, you can kind of expect lack of formal chord progressions. You can expect some sections of tracks that are entirely free jazz in terms of lacking rhythmic support, so the musicians really have the ability to go wherever. I would say that this is one of the most adventurous, if not the most adventurous titles in the Tone Poet series thus far. Now stay tuned, because some more in this series are going to be even more adventurous than this. But I also think that there's some pieces here that will ground you a bit more, like in the very sort of post-bop in-feel song Mr. Jones, which was actually the title of a later Elvin Jones album as well. And really the entire second side of this thing is more post-bop, whereas the first side is more spiritual jazz. And my guess is that they staged the tracks in that way. So you really get a different sense, I think, depending on whether you're listening to the first track, the first side, or the second side. So what I would say is that if you like that kind of Coltrane-inspired spiritual jazz, then the first side's for you, and if you like the sort of post-bop thing that Elvin Jones is doing otherwise later, you'll like the second side. But really, this whole album is fantastic, and I also think that this is a great addition. All right, jumping ahead a month, on February 2nd, 2024, we have Blue Mitchell Quintet with Down With It. So on this, you have Junior Cook, Chick Corea, Gene Taylor, and Al Foster. This was originally recorded in July of 1965. Rudy Van Gelder, again, is the engineer. So in terms of the content, a couple of interesting things. One is that there's only 2 originals on the album, originals by the band members, and the others are not. Now, one of the tracks, titled Sakura Sakura, which is a Japanese cherry tree, is penned by Terumasa Hino, which is a very interesting inclusion here. So initially I went down the research path of determining how might that have happened, because I didn't think that Terumasa Hino was on the American jazz scene at the time, and he wasn't. So he wrote the track Sakura Sakura, and it was included in the Hideo Shiraki Quintet's release that was put out in 1965 on the Saba label. And so I thought, oh, maybe maybe the musicians heard that heard that rendition, except that album hadn't been recorded yet. So the problem is that track was first recorded right here on this Blue Note session, like 5 months before the Saba title was recorded. And so I ended up doing even more research and spent way more time than I should have coming to this conclusion, just to share with you that it turns out that Terumasa Hino gave the composition to Blue Mitchell to use when Mitchell was traveling to Japan on tour. I guess they got together for jam sessions. They met, Hino was a fan and was like, hey, here's a track that I wrote, you should write it. And it is fantastic. It is one of the best pieces on this album. I think it's a huge highlight. All right, so that's kind of that sort of sidebar there. Overall, this music, I would say, takes a little bit out of the Lee Morgan playbook. So it's very similar in feel and energy to some of the more commercial sounding music that Morgan had on some of his albums in the mid-60s. That is not a criticism whatsoever, because I think that albums like Sidewinder and Cornbread are fantastic. Otherwise, comments on this, I think that what you'll find in a lot of these tracks is really dense brushwork by Al Foster, and I think that's going to materialize in a really, really nice way on Tone Poet. So, I think this is another great addition to the list. All right, so the second one in February is a relatively modern title, and we know that Blue Note incorporates these sort of selectively. And this is one. So this is Joe Lovano's Trio Fascination Edition 1. So in this trio with Joe Lovano is Dave Holland and Elvin Jones. So we do have, we have guys who have a lot of history and experience, in playing fantastic music. And so I think that it makes sense, I guess, why they would choose this title. This is a piano-less trio, so there's no piano in it, just as a kind of a point of reference. This is also the very first vinyl edition ever of this title, I believe, and originally recorded in September 1997. I can't remember if I said that. So what I would say about this music is that it is quite advanced playing here. I think the drum work in the Tone Poet edition will be highlighted, and sonically this is going to be a fantastic release. I guess the question will be whether a Tone Poet audience has the patience for a sax-led trio that doesn't have as many toe-tapping melodies. Now, I don't mean to put down the Tone Poet audience. One of the things that the folks behind the Tone Poet series have referenced elsewhere is that they don't want to feel like that they're catering to a commercial audience, or catering to an audience that even has, say, lesser equipment, and they can't necessarily get all the magic that might be in that vinyl, and actually be able to hear it. They're not trying to cater to this sort of general audience. And I think that this title is indicative of that, because this music is more adventurous than I would prefer, is what I'll say about that. Because I do like free jazz, and I like avant-garde, or whatever you want to call it. I like some of that, but at the same time, I feel like I need to be able to follow the music a little bit. It has to resonate with me. And this music by Joe Lovano is just a little bit too far beyond my preferred listening experience, is what I'll say. And I know that there's a lot of people that really love this type of stuff, and that's great, and this is going to be for them, and I'm sure that Blue Note's not going to have a problem selling this. It's just that that's kind of my opinion. So what I guess how this materializes, what it sounds like, is that Lovano kind of launches directly into this like post-bop and free jazz inspired solos. There isn't chord progression nor melody to really anchor the pieces. And so it's hard for me to listen to that for a long period of time because my mind wanders and I focus less on the music, and I'm like, I just don't get as much out of it. So that's my opinion on this title, and you can do with it what you will. I would encourage folks to go and go and preview a track from this album as well as from all the albums to determine whether it's something that you want. Because generally speaking, I'm not the sort of person that would advocate being a completist with the series. But at the same time, I know a lot of people are completists, and I want to give you a little bit of a heads up on what to expect. Okay, so March 1st, we have Jackie McLean's Action. So on here, you've got Charles Tolliver, Bobby Hutcherson, Cecil McBee, Billy Higgins. Great lineup. This was recorded in September of 1964. Rudy Van Gelder is the engineer. Despite the fact that this was recorded in 64, it was not released until 1967. So that's kind of interesting. Also maybe interesting, actually, that I think about it and I'm looking at this. I want to say that for every stereo edition, there might be like some sort of banner up top where they brought this down and it kind of like ruins the image a little bit. I'm trying to think if that was this title or something else. I want to say it was this. So it's interesting because my copy happens to be a mono and you preserve kind of the better cover version, and I'm curious what they're going to do with Tone Poet. Anyway, so from I mentioned that it was shelved, right? Shelved for 3 years. So this was recorded between Jackie McLean's It's Time and Right Now. Okay, so between those albums, but it was shelved for a few years and then released in the Liberty era around the same time as New and Old Gospel, right? So all Jackie McLean albums, and I'm just trying to give you a sense of where this falls because, again, it was shelved for a couple of years. So in terms of the content, 2 of the tracks are penned by Tolliver, 2 are by McLean. This is very sort of adventurous post-bop playing by McLean and Tolliver especially. I feel like Hutcherson adds really, really nice texture here. Such a different sounding instrument, the vibraphone, that when you add on to some of these other musicians that have like almost harsher tones with how they play, it's just such an interesting kind of like almost contradictory sound in the music, and I really, really like it actually. So as much as this album is great and McLean is great, I'm kind of curious how this is going to sound in the Tone Poet format. I think that the track, what's it called, Hootenin, which is the very last track on the album, is going to sound great because it's relatively straight ahead relative to some of the other tracks. But some of the others I'm just not sure, because when you have a lot of dense playing, I'm curious whether some of the best parts about Tone Poet, which is like sonic detail and stereo separation and all these kinds of things, I'm curious how that's going to materialize with a more dense album. And so I'm a little bit, I shouldn't be skeptical about what they do, because Tone Poet editions make the best of what they, of the music in almost every circumstance, right? So I'm sure it's going to sound good. It's just that's something that I'm a little bit curious about, I guess. All right, so the next one up is actually the second title that I don't have a copy of. So this was a shelved session as well. So this is by Booker Ervin, and the title is Textbook Tenor. This was originally slotted for catalog number 4314 in the Blue Note catalog, but it was shelved, like I said. It was finally put out in the double LP sort of set titled Back from the Gig, and then it was released again on CD in 2005. So the lineup here is pretty great. It's Woody Shaw, Kenny Barron, Jan Arnett, and Billy Higgins. It was recorded in June of 1968. Rudy Van Gelder is the engineer. This was actually recorded maybe just months after the, what's the album? It's called The In-Between. The In-Between session. I actually like this album better. I previewed some of it. I actually like this album better than The In-Between. So it's really cool, again, post-bop feeling stuff, which is almost, it's a little bit unusual to even call music that Booker Ervin played post-bop, because he didn't really embody that kind of, I don't know, school of playing that often. Gitchy is a great example of a modal piece. It's one of the tracks on the album. It's called Gitchy. Is a great example of a modal piece that works, I think, just exceptionally well. Probably my favorite on the album. So if you're going to preview something, preview that one. I think Woody Shaw is like the perfect fit for this style of music and is a really interesting sort of complement to Booker Ervin's style. My opinion of this album is that it doesn't sound as close to what a lot of Blue Note music sounds like as it could. And I think it's because additions that I've heard of this album aren't actually punchy in the horns almost at all. It's like more, it's not muted. They just don't sound as like, I don't know, in your face maybe. So I'm going to be excited to hear how Tone Poet treats this, because I specifically think that previous editions of this, they didn't do a good job. And I'm expecting there to be more in the master tapes that Blue Note is going to be, or that Tone Poet's going to be able to highlight. All right, we're in April 5th, and the first one up is Horace Silver's Serenade. So, what about this album? I'm going to try to collect my thoughts and not have it be like a crying session for Horace Silver. So, Silver has long been the redheaded stepchild of the Blue Note catalog. And for the international audiences who don't understand that saying, it means the person who nobody wants. And I really don't understand why. So basically, Horace Silver's albums are not as desirable as you'd think, especially considering the quality of his playing and his influence, not only on the label, but on music as a whole. So think about the non-Jimmy Smith titles of the 1500 series, or the 4000 series, or the 4100 series, or even the 4200 series. Horace Silver's are often valued significantly less than anything else, except for Jimmy Smith. Now, part of that could be that his albums sold in quantity, and I bet he sold well. Now, I know these comments are from the mindset of like value, right? And I know that it's not all about value, right? But it's instructive in terms of understanding whether modern audiences are actually paying attention to his music. So, Silver's Serenade is a great example of one of his records that has been neglected. From a value standpoint, the most it has ever sold for was $252, but that was quite an anomaly, and that was in 2008. It's a mint condition or near mint condition record. Just last week, a VG Plus copy sold for $42. A promo mono copy in VG Plus sold for $67 in June. If it was almost any other title, you'd expect it to go for more. So I don't agree with that perspective, though. I'm not saying that it's justified. I think that Horace Silver's music is fantastic. I think his releases are great, and I don't know why they don't go for more money. But in any event, I'm kind of like setting the stage because I think that this is a very worthwhile title, and I think it's great music. So who we have on this is Blue Mitchell, Junior Cook, Roy Brooks, and Gene Taylor. It's recorded in May of 1963. Rudy Van Gelder is the engineer. This is hard bop throughout, okay? It is not, so it's like blues forward, but not soul jazz. Silver Serenade, the title piece, is a fantastic piece. It's like laid back with a really nice solos actually by Blue Mitchell and Junior Cook. There's a ton of space in this track. It's just like relaxing and chill. And I got this like pretty early in listening to jazz. And so it holds a little bit of a special place for me. I feel a little bit of nostalgia, even just, in the 15 or 20 years that it's been since I first heard it. Let's see, otherwise the track Let's Get to the Nitty Gritty I think is a great solo vehicle. Maybe one point here is that the solos are actually quite contained. They're not that adventurous, but what the trade-off is that the musicians just sound so comfortable with each other. They can craft these like really nice lyrical solos with like super clean tone, and they just execute really, really well on this album. So I don't get it. I don't get why it's not valued more, but independent of that, I think it makes sense to be in Tone Poet, and I think it's great music. All right, the second one in April is Anthony Williams, or Tony Williams' Lifetime. People have been screaming for this record for a while. Over the last couple of years, people are like, "What about Lifetime? What about Lifetime?" When Tone Poet releases their schedule. So here we have it. So this is Tony Williams' debut. It was recorded in August of 1964, just a few months after Williams and Herbie Hancock and Ron Carter recorded Empyrean Isles. So it's, in that time period. Rudy Van Gelder is the engineer on this. Otherwise, the lineup includes Sam Rivers, Bobby Hutcherson, Richard Davis, and Gary Peacock. This is adventurous stuff, closer to free jazz, really. In my opinion, this is a fantastic title, but I'm really curious to see the gap between people who buy this knowing what they are getting into compared to typical tone poets. And I don't know. I think there might be a gap between, like, say, the tone poet completist and people who are, like, selectively choosing, in this idea that you don't necessarily know what you're getting into. I think this is going to be challenging music for some, but also very rewarding at the same time. Even given my sort of proclivities and the fact that I don't really like a lot of the most adventurous free jazz, there's a lot to enjoy about this record, and I think I'm really excited as well that it's included in the series. All right, so May 3rd. This is exciting. This is the first title that Tone Poet has chosen from the Transition Records label. All right, so it is Donald Byrd's Bird's Eye View. So let's see. Recorded in December of 1955. It was actually recorded at a studio in Harvard Square. A number of the Transition titles were. This is the first Transition title, like I said, in the Tone Poet series, and I think an exciting signal that they may go through at least the top titles on the label. Not every album in that label deserves to be reissued by Tone Poet, and that's like that's putting it mildly. So I made a point of finding a copy of each of the Transition titles that they put out, but honestly, some of those recordings don't sound great, and I think part of the reason is because they were pressed on styrene. So I think that that Tone Poet is a great opportunity to get like clean vinyl copies of some of these top titles. So I guess what I mean by styrene, and it refers to the material. What I mean sonically, though, is that it would sort of materialize in this like high-end distortion most frequently, as well as like suboptimal bass, and you really wouldn't get much in the way of sonic detail. And it's unfair because there's so much energy in these recordings, and especially this one, that I feel like is a little bit lacking in the original pressings. And so I'm very excited to see what Tone Poet's going to do. So about this album, right? So you've got a bit of a Messengers feel here because of the lineup. You have Art Blakey, Doug Watkins, Horace Silver, Hank Mobley, and Donald Byrd, who, by the way, were the Jazz Messengers in, I think, their second iteration. I think the only difference was that Kenny Dorham was out and Donald Byrd was in. And then also on this album, Joe Gordon subs for Hank Mobley on some of the tracks. So how the music sounds, well, it's very much hard bop, very much Messengers feel. I would say it's blues forward. It is slower and more laid back tunes than perhaps the louder and faster stuff that you might expect from the Messengers. And it has a little bit of an older feel in terms of the music, well, because it is older. So I'm very excited. By the way, this is kind of fun, right? So Tom Wilson was founded the label. And the speculation is that for sample copies, that it's actually his handwriting, because the handwriting for a sample copy across every title is in the exact same handwriting, and so you can always like kind of tell. And it was such a small label. Anyway, the speculation is that he wrote sample on all the sample copies. I got this in a radio station collection. Other interesting thing is that the Tone Poet edition is not, my guess is, not going to have this banner. So this is like a kind of a hype sticker type of thing, right? Where they reference something by Nat Hentoff in Downbeat. And they did not put this on every title. I think they sent it out either for the promo copies or to the stuff that went to radios. But otherwise, they do not have this. And so Tone Poet, my guess is, would not include it, or if they do, it would be in a probably difficult to execute OB. So we'll see what happens. All right, also in May, we have Bobby Hutcherson's Total Eclipse. So recorded in July of 1968, not recorded at Rudy Van Gelder's, by the way, but Plaza Sound Studios. I actually looked it up because that was curious to me. I couldn't find evidence that the Rudy Van Gelder studio was booked on that day, that particular day, at least with anything that made it to production. So in fact, the only session I could find that entire month at Rudy Van Gelder's was Lonnie Smith's Think. So maybe, I don't know, maybe Van Gelder was on vacation, who knows. Anyway, lineup is Harold Land, Chick Corea, Reggie Johnson, and Joe Chambers. Harold Land and Bobby Hutcherson just gel so dang well together, and this is a fantastic example, despite what, despite the conclusion you may come from, that you may come to from the cover. What I would say about this recording is that it does sound a little bit different than typical Blue Notes, and that may have to do with the engineer. There's almost a veil over the recording that actually sounds really nice. I'm not calling it like a veil that that reduces its intensity or anything like that, or adds any type of negative sonic element. Something I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain. What I will say though is that this is not the only record that kind of has that type of sound to it, and I feel like it works really well with post-bop because it adds this kind of airiness. And something that I like to do with records like this that are light and airy, in fact, is turn them up loud, and I think it makes them sound just that much better. But play the title track, Total Eclipse, and you'll get a sense of what I mean. So that's the track you should preview. There's just kind of this carefree attitude with the melody that then introduces Chick Corea's solo, and it just flows so well. I really enjoy this record. I also acknowledge the cover is terrible, but don't let it fool you. The music is just really great. All right, June 7th, and the second title from Transition Records. Super excited for this one. Doug Watkins, Watkins at Large. Recorded in December of 1956. The engineer was a guy named Bob Guy. Also recorded as studio in Harvard Square, similar to Bird's Eye View. This is only one of two albums that Watkins had as a leader. The other was Solnick for the New Jazz label. So joining Watkins, we have Art Taylor, Kenny Burrell, Duke Jordan, Hank Mobley, and Donald Byrd. Let's see. It says on the front, Live Concert Fidelity. I don't know if you can see that, but it says Live Concert Fidelity. This is a studio session, so I don't know exactly what they're getting at. I would say that this is more of a blowing session than Bird's Eye View. So I mentioned Bird's Eye View is a little bit softer. This is more of a solo, aggressive, kind of recording, more exciting solos is what I'm getting at. Watkins himself plays a lot of walking bass here, or else I'll call it jogging bass because of the pace of the tempo of some of the pieces. Otherwise, what I would say about this, and why I think it's good inclusion for Tone Poet, is that the piano sounds terrible on this pressing on the original. So that's what I'll be looking for in terms of an improvement. It just sounds distant on this thing. Otherwise, it's funny that something that came to mind with these titles. So these originally came with a small booklet. I don't happen to have the booklet for this title, but I have it for some of the others. So it came with a small paper booklet, and I'm curious if Tone Poet is going to reproduce that in order to further the originality of the entire package, right? So the other thing that is common with these pressings is that the labels just fall off. This is what a transition label looks like. They fall off almost every single time. Almost any copy of a transition title that you're going to find is either going to be missing one or both, or they're going to be included, but they're going to be separated. And that is because they used terrible glue that failed on these labels. It just didn't adhere to styrene. And I think this would never happen. I think it would be hysterical if Blue Note decided to do something similar with their labels. All right, also in June, and also not Blue Note, Kenny Dorham and Jackie McLean's Into Somethin. So, and by the way, my copy here is a Big Ed copy. If you've been involved in collecting jazz records for any period of time, you've come across a Big Ed copy. It's some collector, I don't know who it was, but on every album cover wrote Big Ed. And so this one, it's not as intrusive, although it's quite large. It's just as large on every title. But think about if this was a predominantly white cover. It was just such a horrible idea, but I don't know why he did it. But anyway, you'll come across a record that was from Big Ed's collection invariably at some point, and unfortunately, my cover is from Big Ed's collection. So this was a live album recorded in 1961 at the Jazz Workshop in San Francisco. Jackie McLean and Kenny Dorham are joined by Walter Bishop Jr., Leroy Vinegar, and Art Taylor. There are two originals here by Dorham. The rest are standards. So my comments on the recording: the piano sounds out of tune on this album in many places, but still the music is great. Now remember, Tone Poet can't correct. They don't correct things. They just pull what's on the master tape. So the piano's still going to be a little out of tune. But the music is great. I'd call it hard bop, but it's understated hard bop. There are some slower pieces. The music's not terribly dense. I think that Art Taylor's drums are a bit lost in the mix of the original. So when I think about this album and I think about the opportunity for it to be on Tone Poet, I'm hoping that those master tapes have more magic in them that Tone Poet can bring out and basically have their release be a big improvement from this one, because this original does not sound great. All right, July 5th, and the third month in a row that we get a Transition Records title. Very exciting. So, so July 5th, Donald Byrd, Byrd Blows on Beacon Hill. This is the third and final Transition title of 2024. Recorded in May of 1956 at the home of Steve Bassett on Beacon Hill in Boston. He was a recording engineer. So let's see. This is a quartet format as opposed to the previous one. He plays alongside Ray Santizzi, Doug Watkins, and Jimmy Zitano, and the group plays no originals, all sort of standards. It's a relatively short album at about 30 minutes, I think, in length. In terms of how it sounds, there's more. I feel like it's just more intimate feel to the music, but also kind of a raw feel that makes you feel just a little bit closer, perhaps, to the music. And I think it has to do with, I think why I came to that conclusion, it's probably Donald Byrd's tone and just the sound of the room that it was recorded in. I feel like his tone is a little bit rawer, and you'd hear a little bit more of that kind of room noise that makes you feel just like a little bit more like a live performance, even though it was meant to be studio. Byrd does play more sensitive here than maybe you'd expect. He's not playing like these, sort of super impressive solos. It's a little bit more understated, but that's just the style that they went with in this quintet format. Remember, he's like also super young here. He's also the only horn, so you kind of focus, I think, on some of the starkness of the playing. Just as a quick aside, you can see again sample, which is written there. Again, my speculation, but maybe inaccurate, is the owner of the label. And then here, I mentioned this earlier, here's an example of the booklet, right? So this is what Transition would include in every one of their releases, is a little booklet that provides the liner notes. I guess they thought that it was too cumbersome to paste liner notes to the back. And what's kind of cool is you get like pictures and stuff in addition to text. And so I don't know whether Blue Note would consider reproducing these or fitting some of this content into the gatefold. I don't know. Either way, right? Next up in July is Wayne Shorter's Odyssey of Iska. This, I'm told, is a favorite of Joe Harley's, and therefore probably the inclusion. So this was recorded in August of 1970 at A&R Studios, so not at Rudy Van Gelder's. The lineup includes Gene Bertoncini, I think. You got Ron Carter, Cecil McBee, Billy Hart, Alphonse Mouzon, Frank Cuomo, and Dave Friedman. So let's see, 4 of the 5 tracks are Shorter originals. Perhaps no surprise. I feel like on a lot of Shorter albums, he really wanted to provide all the compositions. And he obviously did to great effect on every single album. What I would say about this music is that this thing is trippy. It's pretty out there, but also nicely produced. Denser orchestration than Shorter's hard bop or post bop sessions. I would say in feel, it is very much post Bitches Brew, post In a Silent Way, but also like just before Weather Report's first album. I don't know, it's just hard to describe. I think the music also comes across, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but like almost like soundtrack to a movie, if like the movie was set in outer space or something. It's adventurous, it's kind of meandering, and it builds over time, and it's super moody. This one I felt like was completely out of left field for Tone Poet, and I am just really curious to hear how the thing is going to sound. And I say out of left field, I don't mean that it isn't great music, it's just that it's so different. It's so different than the rest of the titles that they've chosen. Incidentally, I've never come across a copy that doesn't have horrible ringwear on it. So I am personally looking forward to upgrading this by getting the Tone Poet. All right, so at the risk of losing my voice, let's continue into August. So on August 2nd, we have Lee Morgan's Taru. This is a LT Series edition right here. So don't worry, the Tone Poet cover is not going to look like this. I'll show you what the Tone Poet cover is going to look like. This was a shelf session, right, put out on the LT Series in probably 1980 or so. It was recorded in February of 1968. Rudy Van Gelder was the engineer. 3 of the 6 tunes are originals by Lee Morgan, and the lineup includes Benny Maupin, George Benson, John Hicks, Reggie Workman, and Billy Higgins. So from a chronology standpoint, it was recorded between The Sixth Sense and Caramba. But again, it was shelved along with a number of other Lee Morgan sessions. What I would say about the style here is that it is that kind of like introspective post-bop thing that probably has more in common with Search for the New Land than the stuff that Lee Morgan recorded that was actually being played on the radio. I thought that George Benson was an interesting inclusion until I heard the music and I realized how just absolutely cool it is to hear him play in this context. I think he is such a good addition to this album, and I can't wait to hear how he sounds in the Tone Poet series, or the Tone Poet edition. Morgan's playing does have a slight echo, and I actually think that that's a really nice effect. It keeps the thing feeling like spacey and expansive and just really good. So this is one of those sessions that, you know, here's the thing. A lot of us are anything Lee Morgan, right? And we want all the Lee Morgan stuff to be put out on Tone Poet, and they seem to be delivering. And I just can't wait to hear how this one's going to sound. Definitely going to pick it up. All right, August must be the month for LT Series because the second title being released on the same day is also an LT Series. It is Bobby Hutcherson's Medina. And I'll show you it here because I don't even have an LT Series. Some of these titles, especially by Hutcherson in that series, they got so expensive, and in some cases they were the only way to hear the music, and so people just flocked to it because it's great stuff. And Medina is great stuff as well. So this was recorded in August of 1969, and it was shelved until 1980 or so, like every other LT Series. It was engineered by or recorded by Rudy Van Gelder, so you can expect the sound to be top-notch. The lineup includes Harold Land, Stanley Cowell, Reggie Johnson, and Joe Chambers, and I absolutely love this combination because Hutcherson, Cowell, and Chambers, Hutcherson, Land, and Chambers have shown just repeatedly that they can do no wrong together. In terms of the tunes, it's a lot of originals, 2 by Hutcherson, 2 by Cowell, and 2 by Chambers. I would say that this sounds similar in feel to Total Eclipse to me, which makes sense given that they're the same era and some of the same musicians, in fact, are across these 2 albums. I would say, though, that the rhythm here, the drum work by Joe Chambers, is more complex rhythmically. And I can't get enough of hearing him and Hutcherson together. I'm sorry, I already said that, but like it's so, when I think about Joe Chambers' style of playing, it works so well with the post-bop music that Hutcherson was playing at this time period. I would also say that this recording doesn't have that same, I mentioned a veil, like a different kind of sound, almost like it was non-Blue Note on Total Eclipse. And I don't think that that's present here. I do think that it sounds more like a Rudy Van Gelder recording, well, because he recorded it. So anyway, the fact that I have never owned this in any format and that it's Bobby Hutcherson and I love Bobby Hutcherson, this is like the easiest decision for me in the world to pick up. All right, moving into September, on the 6th, we have the Modest Jazz Trio's Good Friday Blues. So this is not a well-known recording, and I'm not just talking about me, I'm talking about generally. This is not a well-known recording. So who do we have? We have Jim Hall, Red Mitchell on piano instead of bass, and we have Red Kelly. So it's a trio. That's the lineup. The engineer is Richard Bach, who did such an excellent job on so many Pacific jazz records. I would call this light and easygoing music. It is definitely not hard bop. It is more of that West Coast kind of style. And I would say that this is a very surprising title as well to include. It is just so different in tone than, I would say, the bulk of Tone Poet. It's hard to describe tone poet as saying it's only this or that. It's just that it often seems like we get hard bop and post bop kind of stuff, and whenever we get free jazz or we get like this really relaxed kind of cool jazz thing, it feels unnatural. But more and more I feel like we are seeing tone poet include some of these sessions, especially by Pacific, and so I think it's just something that we should expect a little bit more in terms of that style. So I don't really have much to say about this. I did preview some of it. I've never owned a copy. It's a little bit too light for me. I don't know that I don't know how much replayability it would get, but I would encourage folks to go and listen, because if you like that kind of relaxing guitar led thing that was going on in the West Coast, I think this is for those people who really like that type of music. So a great complement to that release in August, or excuse me, in September, is Jackie McLean's Let Freedom Ring. And I mean that facetiously. So recorded in March of 1962 by Rudy Van Gelder, you've got Walter Davis Jr., Herbie Lewis, and Billy Higgins making up the quartet. This is one of McLean's best recordings, and possibly his best. And I'm like thinking about that right now, but I think I can stand by that. So some will recognize, I would say that the most recognizable piece on here is Melody from Melané. Some will recognize that track because McLean plays it with Kenny Dorham on Dorham's United Artist album titled The Matador, which is a great album as well, and was put out like last year on Impex. I really love this version as well. I don't necessarily know which is better, but anyway, it's like fantastic rendition here. What I would say overall though is that there is a almost like controlled rawness to McLean's tone that I think is fantastic to hear on this album. He uses it basically throughout. It's almost like he has like a bit of a rasp, but it's so precise with his playing while also being so inspired with his like freeform improvisation, which does include some screeching, so get ready for that. I don't know, I just feel like McLean really stands out in this recording, possibly because he's the lone horn against the rhythm section, and the rhythm section is more restrained. They're not really matching his energy, and that's not a criticism, it's a character of just this album, and I just think it makes McLean sound all the more dynamic and all the more interesting to hear. This is going to be a great one to have on Tone Poet. I can almost guarantee it. All right, getting into Q4. So coming up on October 4th. This is an interesting one. So you've got Booker Little. I guess the title is Booker Little 4 and Max Roach. This was recorded in October of 1958 at the NOLA Penthouse Studios, and it was recorded by Lewis Merritt, I believe. I think that's referenced somewhere here. Yeah, Lewis Merritt. So I guess let's see. This was actually produced though, so it was recorded by Lewis Merritt, but it was produced by Tom Wilson. So Tom Wilson's back. He's the one who started Transition Records. And actually United Artists is indeed where he went as soon as Transition Records folded. It was only around for like 2 years and closed the label, and he went over to United Artists for a time. And he produced a number of other great titles as well, like Cecil Taylor's Hard Driving Jazz. He produced Art Farmer's Brass Shout, I think it was called. Curtis Fuller's Curtis Fuller's Sliding Easy. And he had something to do with some of those more adventurous titles by Savoy as well, like by Bill Barron and Booker Ervin. Anyway, enough about Tom Wilson. The lineup here includes George Coleman, Tommy Flanagan, and Art Davis, in addition to the folks mentioned on the cover. Anyone as fascinated as I am by Booker Little is going to want to pick this up. Booker Little has the sort of the dynamic, I don't know, like personality that he infuses into his playing, like a Clifford Brown. And yet he just, I don't know, in some ways, I don't know whether I should say he's more technically precise, but I feel like he's definitely of the school of Clifford Brown. So I guess what I would say about this music and his playing is that it's very hard bop in feel. I think it showcases how clean and expertly Little could play. And I think that overall these pieces are like solo vehicles, but I think that's okay when you have soloists as strong as Booker Little and George Coleman. I guess if I were to say anything about this inclusion in Tone Poet, my hope is that Max Roach is a little bit more prominent in the master tape than how he is represented here, because I think that his playing is a little bit lost. And it's just a shame because he kind of co-leads this album, right? All right, the second one in October, Donald Byrd's Kofi. This is one of those shelved sessions, but guess what? It was not put out in the LT series. So where did it start? December 1969 at A&R Studios. The lineup includes William Campbell, Frank Foster, Lou Tabakin, Duke Pearson, Wally Richardson, Ron Carter, Bob Cranshaw, Airtu Morera, Mickey Roker, and Dom Romeo? I'm not sure. So this title, for whatever reason, was shelved just for an inordinate amount of time. It was put out on the Heavenly Sweetness label, which is, I believe, French, but no other recent reissue. I've never heard this record for this reason, because it has not been available. Well, until I decided I was going to make this video, and I decided to preview a little bit of it. So my first reaction is, wow, I can't wait for this. I love Donald Byrd during this period. It is super 70s in feel. It is flute heavy, groovy music. It really takes its time kind of building the energy. Donald Byrd's trumpet. The interesting thing that I've observed between Donald Byrd and Freddie Hubbard is that as the 70s hit, Hubbard really leaned into his softer, smoother sound, almost to match the backing music. Whereas Donald Byrd kept his trumpet playing a little bit more raw, but also complemented it with a little bit smoother produced sounding music. And so I just really like hearing that, hearing those differences, I guess, between Donald Byrd and the rest of the band. I think that Duke Pearson's electric piano is a really nice touch here. And I only previewed a little bit, and I just can't wait to hear more. And I can't wait to hear it on Tone Poet. All right, the first title on November 1st is one that I don't have, and that is because it is extremely rare. So this is Clifford Jordan's Cliff Jordan. So it's kind of self-titled, kind of not. This was recorded in 1957 at Rudy Van Gelder's Hackensack studio. No reissues in the United States since 1972. So if you think back to my kind of prediction model thing, this is one of those that just hasn't had a reissue in the US. Not a part of any great reissue series or anything like that. Big lineup here. So in addition to Jordan, we have John Jenkins, Paul Chambers, Art Taylor, Ray Bryant, Curtis Fuller, Lee Morgan. So if you counted those up, there's 4 horns here. So as you can imagine, the focus here is going to be setting up the soloists, because whenever you have that many instruments, they weren't generally doing heavily arranged pieces, right? They were kind of group doing the melody, handed off to a solo. And what's great is outside of some of those introductory melodies, the solo sections become essentially quartet sessions, right? Because you have the soloist, you have the rhythm section, and some of those top hard boppers of the time are on this session. And so just really, really exciting music. And what I will say too about the soloists is they are doing much more than just playing sort of straight blues changes or solos here. As in, they don't stick to the obvious notes in the changes in the blues chord progression that so distinctly ground it to the blues. And in so many other sessions, a lot of musicians do ground their solos to those to the roots of the chords, if that makes sense. And so I think how that the summation of this style of playing is that it sounds, even though there's a lot of blues stuff here, it sounds a little bit more adventurous, a little bit more forward looking. And I certainly would say that Lee Morgan is a highlight here. He sounds particularly punchy, and that's a big reason to be excited for this one. All right, home stretch, 3 more. So next one up, and apologize for the glare, this is Bobby Hutcherson's Dialogue. So let's see. This is one actually that, well, let me think about this. I think this is going to excite a lot of people. A lot of folks have been talking about needing a reissue of Dialogue and preferring the Tone Poet format versus the Classic Series format. Almost like that it would be wasted on the Classic Series. So this was otherwise put out by Elemental. It was a 180 gram release in 2013 in Europe. I don't know anything about that edition. But I'm excited for this one. So originally recorded in April of 1965 by Rudy Van Gelder, you've got Sam Rivers, Freddie Hubbard, Andrew Hill, Richard Davis, and Joe Chambers. This really could be Hutcherson's best title in his entire catalog. It really could be. So as much as we had Let Freedom Ring, Jackie McLean, one of my favorites, this is like one of my favorite Hutcherson titles. These are some of the reasons why I think this Tone Poet calendar release schedule is really great. So this music is adventurous. It's a little avant-garde, but not going all the way there. Even though it does on some tracks, like Les Noirs Marchands, I think is what it is. But they don't go that far out consistently across the album. So there is plenty to ground you, making you feel like you're stepping into, I don't know, music that was simultaneously, I don't know, it simultaneously had the ability to relate to the listener, it feels like, of the time, while also challenging them and really making you feel like you're listening to like groundbreaking music. I think that's what I'm getting at. One of the standouts here who really makes this album special, I think, is Sam Rivers. He plays a variety of reed instruments, just sounds really, really inspired. I think he's a great complement to the solos by the other musicians as well. There are more introspective sounding pieces here too, and really a range of dynamics across the album. So I think that it's a great choice for Tone Poet, and it'll be interesting to see what they do, and even how, even the differences, I guess, in the master tapes between the different styles represented on this on this single album. All right, December 6th, there's just two more. Freddie Roach's Good Move. So, okay, this is an organ-led album. It was recorded in November and December of 1963 by Rudy Van Gelder. In the lineup, some great folks: Blue Mitchell, Hank Mobley, Eddie Wright, Clarence Johnston. Actually, just 4 of the 8 tracks here have horns on them, so the other half are trio format with organ, guitar, and drums. What I would say about Freddie Roach's organ, it's a Hammond B3, and it's kind of that church organ sound, giving his music, I think, just like that sort of gospel flair, if you will. He uses a lot of, I don't know whether to call it vibrato, but whatever organ effect it is that causes the sound to kind of like waver. He doesn't play in an overbearing way like Jimmy Smith sometimes can, and yet this feels more organ heavy, like a more organ heavy album than any other Tone Poet album that comes to mind. I'm trying to think the others that have organ. So otherwise, and that's not a good thing. Otherwise, the few folks who could save this album, Blue Mitchell and Hank Mobley, they don't play their best here, in my opinion, especially Mobley, whose tone is thin. He doesn't sound as good as we all know he can. It's also possible that wasn't what was asked of him. So he and Blue Mitchell play blues forward, oftentimes predictable solos, in my opinion. I would say that this is a little bit of a toe tapper, but just not as good as others. And by that, I mean not as good as some of the others by Roach, but also certainly as some of the others by other organ players. So even though this originally came out, it was put out by Blue Note, I guess it'll be interesting to hear if there's any type of different balance that materializes through the Tone Poet edition. But otherwise, I'm a little skeptical on this one. I'm just not. This one doesn't excite me. All right, the last one in the regular sort of calendar is Hank Mobley's A Slice of the Top. I keep wanting to say a slice off the top, but it's not. It's a slice of the top. So this was recorded in March of 1966 by Rudy Van Gelder. It was finally released in the LT series in 1979. So after the recording of A Caddy for Daddy, he had 4 straight shelved sessions. So talk about being sort of demoralizing. But those were Straight No Filter, Slice of the Top, Third Season, and then Faraway Lands, before he ended up recording High Voltage, which actually was released at the time. The lineup here includes James Spaulding, Lee Morgan. We have Kian Zawadi, I think that's how that's pronounced, Howard Johnson, McCoy Tyner, Billy Higgins, and Bob Cranshaw. 4 of the 5 tracks here are Mobley originals, which is interesting. And I'm going to say that I think that this is some of Mobley's best work of that time period. It is more orchestrated and arranged than perhaps you'd expect of Hank Mobley, but I think that it works really, really well. And the larger format is something that it's not like he was the only person doing that for Blue Note. There's lots of these other guys that were doing it too. The music is still very exciting. There's excellent solos by Mobley and Morgan especially. And as much as lately on both the previous release as well as what album was I talking about recently where I was like, Mobley doesn't sound good, and people kind of were jumping all over me. He still had plenty of life left in him, and this is a great example of Mobley just playing really strong, even a little bit later in his career. All right, now's the time where I leave you with a couple of things. The first is, what's that box set or expanded release going to be? And the other is top picks. So let's cover this relatively briefly. So speculation that I've heard, and just to refresh your memory, in the Blue Note release, the Tone Poet calendar, they referenced that there's going to be some sort of special box set or expanded edition. And they didn't say what title it was, but it was going to be announced in first couple of months of 2024. So I thought it'd be fun to guess. A lot of people are saying it's going to be either Monin or something else, because those are like quintessential Blue Note titles. And I got to say, I do not think that they are going to do expanded editions of either one of those titles. This is my opinion. But for Monin, they just had a 75th anniversary edition a couple of years ago. They had a classic series edition already, which would have been in the last year or two. They had a Music Matters 33 RPM. They had an SRX. They had an Analog Productions 45 RPM. I don't think that they're going to then try to do some sort of expanded thing on Monin, even though I'd buy it if they did. Something Else is the other one, and I would say the same thing. 75th anniversary, classic series already came out. Music Matters 33 RPM, SRX, Analog Productions. I don't think they're going to do it. All right, so if I were a betting man, I think it's going to be a box set rather than a super deluxe mono stereo combined kind of thing of a single title. And I've got 4 guesses, and I think all of them are, no, 3 of them are live. So what they are combinations of albums, and that's what I think they're going to go with. This is just, I don't have any special knowledge or anything. This is just what I think. So I think 1, it could be Jazz Messengers at Cafe Bohemia, volumes 1 and 2. And I know there may be some resistance to some of these because of the quality of the sound, and would they really choose it? But I just think that some of these, they haven't been released in a long time, and I think it could be compelling if they brought them together, some type of special release. So Jazz Messengers, Cafe Bohemia, volumes 1 and 2. They were put out by Music Matters in 45 RPM, but otherwise no audiophile version available. I also think it could be Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, and Night at Birdland, volumes 1 and 2. I think a third potential is Sonny Rollins' A Night at the Village Vanguard set. And the reason why I say set is because at some point in the past, I think there was as many as like 3 different albums that came out from those sessions. The only reason why they may not is if there's duplication of some of the tracks, like from Night to Night, because I think it might have been like recorded over multiple nights and they kind of culled the best together. But they have in the past released like 3 discs from those sessions. So I think it'd be interesting to bring that together. And then the fourth one that maybe is the more likely one, because I know Joe Harley really likes Kenny Burrell, but what about Blue Lights, volumes 1 and 2 with the Andy Warhol covers? I don't know. I think that could be really interesting. All right, so my picks for what I'm going to get, and this is probably going to go, it's probably going to be obvious for folks who follow my channel and listen to me talk all the time. I like the shelf stuff, right? Because I don't like the LT series and I want to hear what the improvement's going to be. So therefore, Bobby Hutcherson's Medina is going to be a top pick. Lee Morgan's Taru is going to be another. Hank Mobley's a slice of the top. So those are 3. Oh, and of course, Booker Ervin's textbook Tenor. So each of those that were shelved, I'm going to have to get. Now, as I'm scrolling through the list and I'm thinking about others that I would like, that I'm like really thinking I'm going to buy, as you know, because I just showed you, I have like originals of so many of these. So do I really need them? I will say the transition titles, I'm probably going to buy all 3. Mix of room for improvement and condition of my copies. My Donald Byrd titles are actually in fantastic shape, but not the other one, not Watkins at large. So I'm gonna pick those up for sure. Really interested, and obviously I can do it one at a time and figure out if they're doing a good job with transition. So those are other top picks. I'm not gonna get the Modest Jazz. I'm not gonna get Freddie Roach. Maybe the Booker Little, but I may take a wait and see approach. Oh, I've got to see I've got to get the Donald Byrd Kofi release as well. I forgot to mention that in the shelf. So I'm really excited. Oh, and Cliff Jordan, I don't own any version of that. So I've got to get that. So what I will say in summation is that this is an excellent list. there's many more titles that in my head I'm already saying I am definitely getting than I have in previous years. And one of the reasons is because I have so many of these things already, right? And I don't need multiple copies. So that's just me. You shouldn't like take my my situation and necessarily say this is what you should do as well. But that's how I'm thinking about it. Is it what do I have? What was originally shelved and what was originally shelved? Combining these things as well as the fact that I want to hear what they do with transition. I just think that there's a lot to be excited about this release calendar, and don't worry, as we move into 2024 and as we go through the months, the titles that I pick up, I'm sure I'll be highlighting right here on this little YouTube channel. So stay tuned for that, and stay tuned for the rest of the videos that I have planned for December. I'm sorry, this is probably an hour-long video, but thank you, and I'll see you next time.